Now it's once again time to look back and reflect on the year that was, or at least the year that was for Star Wars and its fans, especially considering just yesterday we got a look ahead at the year that will be, at the lineup for 2023, which is, well, pretty much everything we expected that would be coming and is something I talk about in a video over on my other channel. Anyway, to say that 2022 was yet another interesting year for the franchise and its fans would, I think, be an understatement. Because though we once again didn't get a new film, and we're still unsure as to what that next film will even be exactly, we did get 3 live-action shows on Disney+, those of course being The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Andor. And though once upon a time in years past, or before the dark times, before Disney, I probably would have looked at that lineup beforehand before it all came out, and all but lost my mind with excitement. I would have been thrilled to get an Obi-Wan show with Ewan McGregor that of course would explore his time on Tatooine and how he grapples with his life there as he trains with Qui-Gon Jinn, or seeks a way to commune with him to begin that training, struggling because he may have had his faith in the Jedi a bit shaken after everything that happened with Anakin. I would have also been thrilled to get a Boba Fett show set after Return of the Jedi and starring Tamora Morrison that of course would show the character on the warpath out for vengeance and against everyone and anyone who ever wronged or doubted him as he proves once and for all why he is the greatest bounty hunter we've ever seen. And I would have been, well, curious about this show called Andor set around the time period of the original trilogy or right before it, which yeah does seem to be a time period that's maybe almost a bit played out or overexplored at this point. But who knows, maybe it could be something special. But instead of feeling that way, instead of being overly excited, I went into this previous year filled with something like trepidation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was absolutely hoping the shows would all be good. As I've said before, I always root for Star Wars, even if I'm not the biggest fan of Disney. It's like, as I've compared it to before, wanting to see your favorite sports team win, even if you might not love the ownership or maybe even the coach or some of the players. You love what the team itself represents or means to you and how it brings you together with other fans. But anyway, I had this terrible feeling or fear going into Boba Fett and Kenobi that they would once again miss the mark with legacy characters, that they were only being used for their names, and that minimal effort would be put into the stories and shows themselves because, from their point of view, the Disney point of view, why go all in and spend big on something that's all but guaranteed to be a hit pretty much no matter what you do or what it is? Which, at least from my point of view, and as I always say, you're free to and even encouraged to disagree or see things differently and leave your thoughts in the comments below, but from my point of view, yeah, that pretty much turned out to be the case with both shows. I mean, you know you've screwed up with a show when the 5th episode of it rolls around, of Boba Fett I'm talking about here, and even though your titular character isn't even in it and it has little to nothing to do with the previous 4 episodes, it turns out to be by far the best episode yet, only to be trumped by the next episode, which was even better and didn't have Boba Fett in it again, other than, I think, one line. Then there was Kenobi, which suffered greatly from, well, poor writing in general, but also taking an idea that was probably better suited for a 2-hour-long movie and bloating it into a 6-episode series, to say nothing of how fast and loose it plays with the canon or what we thought we knew about Vader and Kenobi in this time period. And to me, that series, the Kenobi series, was the ultimate example of spectacle over substance and not trusting fans or your audience to accept and enjoy something a little more slow-paced and introspective out of Star Wars. It was, to be honest, the show that almost, and maybe in some ways, broke me as a fan because they, again in my opinion here, they utterly failed to do something profound with one of the most beloved and important characters in the franchise. I mean, if you can barely hit me in the feels with Ewan playing Obi-Wan Kenobi again and Hayden coming back to play Vader and playing Anakin as well, because yes, it does have some moments, not many of them, but it does have them. But if you can barely get any emotions out of me with those 2 characters, what can you hit me in the feels with? Well, it turns out the answer to that question was a character by the name of Kino Loy, who, unlike Vader or Kenobi, I knew absolutely nothing about going into the show, going into Andor. I didn't even know he existed or that Andy Serkis, who played the character, would be in the show until he popped up out of nowhere. And now, afterwards, after seeing his story unfold across 3 episodes, I still almost know nothing about the character other than he can give one hell of a motivational speech and that he can't swim. And him telling us that he can't swim is now somehow one of the most heartbreaking lines in all of Star Wars, even more so than pretty much all of what Vader and Kenobi had to say to each other in that meeting that took place between the other 2 meetings. You know, the one where we saw Kenobi come to terms with the fact that his brother Anakin was dead and gone, destroyed by Darth Vader, yet let Darth Vader live and go on killing and doing horrible things, only to some 10 years later ask his son to kill him, reiterating the conclusion he'd come to 10 years prior in the process. Anyway, it certainly wasn't only Kino Loy and his story that either hit me in the feels or got me to care in some way, shape, or form. Pretty much every single character in Andor, and there were a lot of them, had me intrigued and vested in their story. Even a guy swinging a brick at a stormtrooper had me cheering more than Kenobi and Vader swinging lightsabers at each other. There was also this other guy, Luthen Rael, talking about the price he'd paid, how he had essentially given up his soul to hopefully achieve a victory he'd never get to enjoy. That monologue of his was somehow more profound and moving than anything Kenobi said or did in all 6 episodes of his show combined, a show that was supposed to explore the character in his darkest hour. We also had an ISB officer, Dedra Meero, trying to make a name for herself, and her obsession to find the rebel at the center of a movement only she truly feared was somehow more exciting than watching Vader or Reva hunt for Kenobi, or seeing what happened when they actually caught up with him. Then there was a young man named Cyril Karn who sought to do little more than prove himself, and he had this strained and weird relationship with his overbearing mother that I found more interesting than Princess Leia, who also sought to prove herself, and how she had her loving relationship with parents that weren't always too bright. Basically, and somehow, a show with a bunch of brand new or unknown or mostly unexplored characters like Mon Mothma had me hooked on and loving Star Wars far more than a show that was, you could say, or should have been, something akin to the very epitome of Star Wars itself when you consider the characters in it. And all of this, the surprise show that in a way reinvigorated my love for Star Wars after Kenobi almost broke it, was brought to us by a guy, that being Tony Gilroy, who freely admits he wasn't much of a Star Wars fan going into it. Which is rather interesting because I'd always believed, and I've argued this before in videos, that you needed a fan to create truly great Star Wars, that there was some type of secret ingredient only those who had a solid understanding of Star Wars should be able to utilize or duplicate. Which isn't to say I thought you needed to be a super fan who knows every single tiny little detail, right down to the migratory habits of wild bantha on Tatooine. I didn't think you needed to know literally everything there is to know about Star Wars, but that you needed a really solid understanding and appreciation or it just wasn't going to turn out right. And though it's not like Tony Gilroy didn't have a team of lore experts at his disposal, which he has talked about and thanked, nor was he actively trying not to include any of the lore. If anything, there's quite a few little Easter eggs or moments of well-done fan service in Andor. It certainly embraces the lore without smothering us in it for the sake of smothering us in it. But it turns out the only thing you really need to create good Star Wars, or the main thing you need is, well, great writing, which leads to good stories and good characters. Period. That is the one and only simple key. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself right now, wow, I sat through this whole video just for him to state the obvious. But the thing is, I've heard many people say they didn't watch Andor because they didn't care about the character going into it, or because they know he's eventually going to die in Rogue One, so what's the point? And well, spoiler warning here, but we all know how Vader and Kenobi are going to eventually die in story, so what's the point of the Kenobi series? Why was it something fans have been asking for a long time? And the answer to that question is because, well, we thought it would be and wanted it to be good because we watch entertainment simply to be entertained. And we thought there was a really, really good chance, considering we care so much about the character of Obi-Wan going into it, that it would, of course, be good. And I know I'm stating the obvious yet again. Of course we watch entertainment to be entertained. Why else would we watch? But maybe that's not so obvious anymore in the day and age of mega franchises and the interconnected stories they constantly give us. I, and probably you who watches videos about entertainment, or so I'd assume since you're watching this and have made it this far, you've probably heard somebody at some point say, what's the point of watching something, some piece of content, A, B, or C, whatever it might be, if it doesn't connect to something else, D, E, or F, or have consequences for other parts of the story, part G. Some will even claim something to be good or worth watching for no other reason than the connectivity or it being vital to watching or maybe something else down the road. And though I'll freely admit I love the idea of interconnected storytelling, but I can't help but feel like, in a way, it's become a lure, crutch, and hindrance all at the same time. That it's used to lure in audiences, used as a crutch to prop up sometimes poor stories, and then has to be fully connected, or fans will call it pointless. That's, of course, the hindrance of this franchise tag. And so what I loved about Andor, even though, yes, it does quite obviously and in big ways connect to the larger story of Star Wars, but it felt like its own story first and foremost. It was just a great, well-written story before anything and everything else. It didn't feel like it needed to do something for another part of the story. It decided to be its own thing while also being in this larger universe. And though I don't want to see the age of franchises necessarily go away, I do still enjoy it for better or worse at this point. I do think we need to get back to great writing before profound connections. We need to get back to storytelling over franchise content creation. That was the simple lesson I took away from Star Wars this previous year. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about the state of franchises these days. Are you sick and tired of them? Do you want to see them keep going? Or do you maybe want to see the age continue, but maybe a little less interconnectivity and a little better storytelling in general? Whatever the case may be, you know what to do. Leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.